Well, we're up to chapter 2 today. Last week we covered chapter 1 of the Footsteps of Messiah. And before we start, let's just do a quick recap. In Revelations 1, verse 19, it gave us, in terms of the book of Revelation, that verse revealed three major sections in that book. And that was the first thing was the things which John saw. And then the second section was the things which are. And the third was the things which came to pass. So that was in Revelations 1 verse 19. They gave us that sections for the book of Revelation. We also saw the theme of the book of Revelation. That's given in verse 7 of Revelation chapter 1, which says, "Behold, he cometh with the clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they that pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth shall mourn over him. Even so, amen." So the central theme of the book of Revelation is, of course, the second coming of Messiah. Now, the other thing too we picked up on too from that recap from last week was that in Revelations 1 from verses 9 to 20, we covered the first major section. What did John actually see? And so we see in verses 12 to 16, John, what he actually saw was he saw a vision of Jesus that he'd never seen before. So that was amazing in itself. Because you've got to remember that John had seen Jesus in his human form as a prophet when he was a disciple following Jesus. And he also saw him in his glorified state, meaning as Son of Man, as a priest when he resurrected form. But now we see that John is seeing Jesus in a completely different form that he's not used to. And the form that he sees here when it was described there, remember describing Jesus in a real spectacular form, he's seeing Jesus as king. And not only as king, but he's also seeing him as a judge as well, in a form in which Jesus will come back as in the second coming. So that's the form that we will likely see Jesus in his third form. Now, just one part from that recap is the mystery in verse 20. There's an explanation of the things which is the mystery of the seven stars, which was in Messiah's right hand. And then, of course, we heard the seven golden candlesticks. Now, the seven stars are the angels of the seven churches, and the seven candlesticks represent the seven churches. Now, remember, the term mystery was used in the New Testament, and it always refers to something that's totally unknown in the Old Testament. So that's where that word mystery. So when it's revealed for the first time in the New Testament, of course, then there's no longer a mystery. But in the Old Testament, of course, it was. Now, what is found in the Old Testament, just here before we start the chapter 2, is in terms of the seven branch lampstand. That was used symbolically in the Old Testament, but what we find new that's here in Revelation is that what's discovered here is that it's seven individual lampstands, and each one is representing a specific church. So that's what's slightly different here that's been revealed here is there's seven individual lampstands. As opposed to when you find this in the Old Testament, it's just symbolically used as the seven branched lampstand. Just to give you an example, can you pass me that lamp? Unless you're like AJ who's been to Israel, or Teresa, you'll be familiar with that, or Marge, but this is what I'm referring to. So that's a lampstand or a seven branched lampstand. Anyway, so that's just a quick recap. I know there was a lot more, but I just thought those are some of the things for us just to quickly have a quick refresher over. So now also I've just put up some graphics. There's a chart there as well that I scanned from the Messiah book, which Arnold's put in. There's a black and white one. That one's it's probably a good one to refer to when we get through tonight, because there's quite a lot of meaty stuff that we will go through. And so luckily, because it's on video, you can always pause it and come back to it and just let the video run. But I've also done some other graphics there I drew some graphics of the statue there, uh, only for my sake because I'm more of a visual person and I have to look at it from that kind of way to sort of get the picture right. But if your IQ is like Tina's, you can probably read those charts that Arnold has and you can figure it out. But for me, um, yeah, I'm a simple guy and I have to see things visually to understand it. But let's start tonight's lesson. In this chapter here, Arnold has introduced to us, or this chapter is dedicated to the introduction of getting our understanding or our minds around this period called the times of the Gentiles. So if we look at Luke 21, verse 24, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now, I guess so that there pretty much gives you a real definition of what times of Gentiles would mean. So the times of Gentiles would be the long period of time from when the Babylonian Empire, uh, obviously uh, captured Israel. So from the Babylonian Empire right to the second coming of Messiah, during which time the Gentiles always had dominance over the city of Jerusalem. So that's the time frame that we're in. So the times of Gentiles is pretty much just a period of when a Gentile kingdom is dominant or rules over the city of Jerusalem. And so we can date stamp that from the Babylonian Empire right to the end of the second kingdom Messiah. Now you might have some questions there too, because you might think, well, currently um, there's no Gentile dominance over Jerusalem because Israel has its own government. But what it doesn't rule out here is that there will be still temporary Jewish control during this time as well. Uh, so even right up until the second coming, it doesn't rule out temporary control of the Jews over their own country. So there's some examples of this over history. So there's the Maccabean period, like in 163 BC. And then you also see the first Jewish revolt against Rome in AD 66-70. I think Dr. John McEwen has a really good study on this. If those of you that have been to his studies, you will hear a lot of his teachings on that. And also you'll see the second Jewish revolt. This would have been against Rome again. And then since then is 1967, the Six-Day War. I like this 1967 because I was born in 1967. And so that's not the reason the Israel won the war, of course, but I remember that clearly because that's the incredible feat where Israel, and to this day, is won the war and, of course, set them into what we know as their own um, country called Israel now. But these are only temporary. That's the key thing to remember here, because there is still a period where the Gentiles will completely tear Jerusalem down. And that would obviously be during the tribulation period, and there'll be a 3.5 year period where that will be true. So the understanding is, or again, to be clear, is that even though there's Jewish control of Jerusalem at the moment, it's only temporary. And it doesn't mean that the times of Gentiles has come to an end. It only comes to an end completely when the Gentiles are no longer in that place where they can control the city of Jerusalem. Now, for those of you that are familiar with what's going on in the news, you'll notice there's a whole lot of anti-Israel sentiment that's always circulating around where Israel's concerned. And there's a lot of nations that at the moment just would love to see the end of Jerusalem rule itself. So that's always on a shaky balance because the shift of power around the world is always centered around whether Israel has control of its own country. But to get a better understanding of the times of Gentiles, which is what this chapter is really dedicated to, there's 4 passages that we will go tonight through. There's 4 passages, and the first passage that we'll start off with to get a better understanding of this period is we will look at Daniel chapter 2, verses 31 to 45. And in that Daniel chapter 2, of course, the basic content of that is that we see that Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, of course. And then what we see is that Daniel in verses 32, 33, we won't go through in that whole introduction of it, but you can read Daniel 31, 35 to catch up on that. But the verses that I want to look at is verse 32, 33. And this is where Daniel gives a description of the image. And in verse 32, as for this image, its head was of fine gold, its breast and its arm of silver, its belly and its thighs of brass. Verse 33, its legs of iron, its feet part of iron and part of clay. So there we see the description that Daniel gives is that the image is you see this image, and it's head of gold, breast and arms composed of silver, belly and thighs of brass, and you see the legs of iron with feet, and also toes of part iron and part clay. 2 things to note here concerning the image that is revealed to Daniel, and it's one thing that you'll notice is that they're all metals. And the thing about these metals is, or the 2 things about these metals is that they increase in strength, but they decrease in value. But as it goes down from gold, silver, brass, and then iron, and then clay, you'll find that it starts off powerfully, but it decreases in value. And we'll more about that. So that's really in regards to the authority and rule is so for example, the head of gold, as we know now, is that represents Nebuchadnezzar, and that represents that Babylon was the absolute monarchy. The thing with that particular monarchy at that period, it was above the law. In fact, because Nebuchadnezzar was the ultimate authority, even if he could always go against his own law, so he was always above the law. The next, when you go down through that statue, the next is the Medo-Persia, which is represented with the silver part there, which is the second part. Was that decreased in authority? So even though they weren't above the law, so when they made decrees, they didn't really have the authority to change their own decrees, not like the Babylonian. And then followed by them is the Hellenic kings, which is the Greek dynasties. For them, they were different. They ruled by a force of conquest and personal gifts, but they also didn't. They also decreased in the way that their authority was handed down to them. And then you'll see is the Roman imperialism, and that was more of a republic. And of course, if you know a little bit about the Roman history, they was always rule was the flavor of the day, and they had an imperial form of the government. Now we'll talk more about that later in terms of the Roman imperialism, because that has a very big part in terms of the times of the Gentiles that we're looking at today. Now then we see in verse 34, we see that this image is destroyed by a stone. Now remember, what's the symbol of a stone? Stone throughout the scriptures is always the symbolic symbol for Messiah or for Jesus. Remember the cornerstone? So the image is destroyed by a stone, and we see in verses 34 to 35, it basically smites the image of the feet. So in verse 34, let's read that. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon its feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken in pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So here we see the image is destroyed, and the stone becomes a great mountain that fills the whole earth. Note there the stone was cut without hands. So if a stone is cut without hands, it points to that it's a divine, the stone is of a divine nature. So that's the stone is divine. Verses 36-45, we see Daniel continuing to give the interpretation after he's given the description. In verse 36, and he tells the interpretation to the king, and then Daniel interprets the meaning of the head of gold there in verses 37 to 38. And he interprets the head of gold, of course, being Nebuchadnezzar, who's the head of the Babylonian Empire. And to note that it's here that the times of the Gentiles begins. This is where the times of the Gentiles officially begin. So if you ever come across this term, or now you've been familiar with the term of the times of the Gentiles, basically it starts right here with Nebuchadnezzar. Another thing too is Nebuchadnezzar destroys the temple, which is the Solomon temple, and 586 BC is that timestamp of when this happens. So in terms of the Gentile empires, it begins with Babylon, and here is we see that Babylon is the first of the four Gentile empires to dominate Jerusalem. Now, one of the things to note here is also that there was an actual grant for Nebuchadnezzar to inhabit the whole earth, or basically he was given that that grant by God to inhabit the whole earth. But Nebuchadnezzar never chose to exercise this rule, even though he was given this. Now let's quickly turn to Jeremiah 27. Jeremiah 27 verses 5 to 8, just to affirm what I just said there in terms of God giving Nebuchadnezzar this particular grant. Verse 5, I have made the earth. So this is God speaking. I have made the earth, the men and the beasts that are upon the face of the earth, by my great power and by my outstretched arm. And I give it unto whom it seemeth right unto me. And now have I given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant. And the beasts of the field also given him to serve him. And all the nations shall serve him, and his son, and his son's son, until the time of his own land come. And then many nations and great kings shall make him their bondman. And it shall come to pass that the nation and the kingdom which will not serve the same Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and that will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation will I punish, saith the Lord, or saith Jehovah, with the sword and with the famine and with the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand. I mean, the basic premise there, or the thing that reminds me, is that God is absolutely in control, that he is the one that appoints anyone in any position. It doesn't matter how evil you think you are, in some form or whatever, the Lord has allowed you to be in those positions. Now we come to the two arms of silver, which is in the breast of silver, and this represents the two nations of the Medes and the Persian Empire. So after the Babylonian Empire has rule over Jerusalem, we'll see that Medes and the Persians are also the next empire that comes on the scene. So this is the second empire, or second Gentile empire. So in verse 39a, it declares, in verse 39a of Daniel, you will see that it declares it to be inferior of the Babylonian empire. So even though it comes in, it's still a little inferior. It lacks the inner unity of Babylon, and this is because, for those who are also aware, if you've done the Daniel, is that the Medes and the Persians had an unusual alliance, even though it's the Medes and Persians. The Persians were the more dominant one out of the two powers, so it was lopsided, really. But the Medes obviously probably benefit more from the Persians' strength than the Persians benefited from them. So that's that's the funny relation between the Medes and the Persians. The Medes weren't as strong or as powerful as the Persians, yet they teamed up in this as well. Here is the Greek empire that comes here, and that's called the Hellenistic Empire. Person of note during this empire or in charge of this is the great Alexander the Great. And so this pretty much is this embraces both territories from the east and the west. Now, Arnold's note here points that the two thighs may also, it possibly may also represent Syria and Egypt. Again, with the Hellenistic Empire, pretty much the same as the Babylonian Empire, they were given the same grant to to rule the whole earth. Well, they were actually given the same authority to take control of the whole earth, but they didn't take that. Of course, they didn't choose to exercise that. Of course, they stopped later, as we know in history. Now, the rest of the image represents the fourth Gentile empire, and this is verses 40 and 43 of Daniel. And that's pretty much the fourth or the Gentile, pretty much where the focus of the times of Gentiles will be pretty much discussed about tonight. And this fourth empire goes through several stages. So this fourth empire is three of which in this text, which Daniel, we were looking at Daniel, there's several stages, of course, the fourth empire, but three of those stages are mentioned in this text. And the first of those three stages is the united stage in verse 40. And in verse 41 is the two-division stage. And that's the two-division stage which still has the strength of iron. And then 3 is the 10-division stage. And that's as seen in the 10 toes of the statue, of the image. And this is verse 42, 43. And that's made up of iron and clay. Now, part of this 10-division stage will be strong, and part of it will be brittle and weak. Now, one of the things to note here is that unity is actually impossible from the way this image is given. Unity is impossible, and we see that 10 divisions take place because obviously there's different elements there that just can't come together, and they can't really form a coalition. I mean, no surprises there. I mean, if we look at our current state of world affairs, there's a lot of shift of power over the past few years, and you'll see that there's always somebody trying to be dominant, but you can't get everybody to agree on one thing. So here we see that take place in terms of the 10 division stage. Now, we'll talk more about this later on, but this is just to cover, just to give us in terms of from Daniel, the passages that we're looking at in Daniel is what Daniel is talking about here. So in terms of the fourth Gentile that's revealed here in Daniel 42 and 43, this is the empire, this is the fourth empire that really will be emphasized in terms of when we're dealing with the times of Gentiles. That's the real emphasis, because that covers really the time that we're in now and the future of the end of the tribulation is this period we're talking about here. So the fourth empire is pretty much the empire that we're in now. It's the fourth one. So the previous three have already been and gone, of course, we've seen, and we know through history, but today we're under that fourth Gentile empire. Now there is a fifth empire. So we've seen through that statue, there is the Babylonian Empire was the first one. The second one was the Medes Persian. And then we'll see the Greeks. And then we'll see after the Greeks came the Romans. And then the Romans, the fourth empire, now comes the fifth empire. So what's the fifth empire? If we look at verses 44, 45, that fifth empire is not Gentile, of course, but Jewish. Why is it Jewish? Because it's the stone. And what's the Messiah's nationality? He's Jewish, or born Jewish as a man. So two symbols are used here, and they're consistent with usage everywhere. So that's stone. And we know that whenever the word stone is used symbolically, it's always a symbol of the second person of the Trinity. So it's always God the Son that's referring to, God the Son, Lord Jesus, or the Messiah of Israel. So that's what the stone is symbolic of when it's used in the scriptures. The second symbol we see there is the word mountain in verse 4 to 45. Mountain. So whenever the word mountain is used symbolically, it always symbolizes in scripture as a symbol of a king, kingdom, or throne. That's what the word mountain is used symbolically for. Now, following the fourth empire that we just talked about, in the future, of course, God sets up his own kingdom. This is straight up after the stone smashes the fourth empire. And God sets up his own kingdom. And when is this kingdom set up? It's in verse 44a, it says there, this fifth empire, which is the Messianic kingdom, is set up during the 10 division stage. So it's during that 10 division stage is when the stone ends this domination of the other kingdoms, or when the Gentiles effectively comes to an end. And so that's what the image talks about. So in the end, the image of Gentile domination will be smashed. I like that word, smashed, at the second coming. At the second coming, the Gentile domination of Israel or over the city of Jerusalem, that will no longer be an issue, and the times of the Gentiles will come to an end because of the stone and, of course, the second coming of Messiah. And once he does that, we see here the kingdom of God is set up, and it's set up by the stone. So just to quickly summarize, when we're talking about the first page, when we're talking about the times of Gentiles, this is a period of time when four Gentile empires will follow one another in sequence, with the fourth empire going through several different stages. So the fourth empire will, within itself, has several different stages, and we'll go into more detail about that. But what this does is that eventually, it gives way to God setting up his own kingdom. And that's an encouragement for us that that the Lord is coming back to set up his own kingdom. So while the Gentile empires are of human origin, the kingdom of stone is different. It's not human in its origin, it's divine in its origin. And so while Gentile empires are all temporary, history's proved that to us. The head of gold was only temporary, as great as it was. Silver, brass, all of these were great empires, but they were only temporary. The only kingdom that is eternal is God's kingdom. And this is shown through the fifth empire when the Messiah returns. And the second passage that will give us some more light in this is Daniel 7 and verses 1 to 28. We'll see four visions that are described that Daniel sees. There's four visions that Daniel sees. Now, if you've got that graphic where I've got the statue on the left side, there's a statue on the left side, and then on the right side, I've just drawn some animals there. Right? If you see, it probably helps. Well, for me, it helps me to look at it. So you've got Daniel 2 of the statue. Now in Daniel 7, you will see visions pretty much talking about the same sort of thing with the statue, but now with a lot more detail. And characteristics are going to come out because of the animals will give certain details that weren't in Daniel 2. So Verses 1 to 14 describes the four visions. We see that it describes the four visions Daniel sees. So in verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven break forth upon the great sea. Now there, after giving the time and location of the four visions in verses 1, you see from verses 2 to 6, the first one is described. Now it begins with the vision of a great sea, of the great sea, and in this case is the Mediterranean. And the seas represents the Gentile world. The sea represents Gentile world. And I'll just give you some scripture reference that you can read in your own time in terms of where the sea is used in terms of for Gentiles or describing Gentile world. There's Isaiah 17, verses 12 to 13. Matthew 13, verses 47 to 50. Revelations 13 and verse 1. And also Revelation 17 and verse 1. Okay, so that's just some references if you want to read in your time. And in verse 3, now what we see in this vision is you see the number 8, four winds. Now that's also the same number as the Gentile empires as well. But the winds, from Arnold's point, note here is that it's more of a point to God's power or God's sovereignty and providence, as opposed to a reference to those Gentile powers. So here the four winds is pointing to God's sovereignty and providence. In verse 3, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Suddenly four beasts arise from the sea, and you see that each one is different from the other, in verse 3. Now all four are Gentile, and all four come out of the Mediterranean area. So again, we know that these are the beasts obviously represent Gentile nation or empires. Verse 4, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon 2 feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So here we see the first beast, and it's described as eagle-winged and lion-like in verse 4. So that represents, just like in the Daniel 2, remember of the image that was given to Nebuchadnezzar, that represents the Babylonian Empire. The latter part of that verse 4, it refers to, it refers to Nebuchadnezzar becoming a beast. That's recorded in Daniel 4:1-37. So that part there where it talks about someone becoming beast-like is Nebuchadnezzar. It's probably a reference to Nebuchadnezzar. For those that are not familiar with the story, Nebuchadnezzar became like a wild beast. But here it's probably here it talks about, remember that Babylon eventually loses its beast-like nature. Remember Babylon, when it conquered a lot of the nations, it was ruthless. So here it kind of lost its beast-like nature because it moved from lust of conquest to the building of culture. So it started to delve into the cultural, rather than from lust of conquering everything, they lost its beast-like nature in that sense. And then in verse 5, and behold, another beast, taken like to a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. Now the second is bear-like, and it represents, of course, the Medo-Persian Empire. And what we see here is the bear is lopsided, so it's raised on one side. Now, remember when I mentioned earlier about the Medes and the Persian relationship, where the Medes wasn't as powerful as Persia, and that's what it's representing here. Is that the lopsided side of this bear is more the Mede side, and the Persians were the more dominant power of the two relationships. Now, what we see is the bear has 3 ribs in its mouth, and this is after having devoured the flesh. Now, historically, these 3 ribs represent 3 kingdoms conquered by the Medo-Persian forces. And those 3 kingdoms was Lydia, Babylonia, and Egypt. So those are the 3 empires in terms of, if you look back at history, where the Medo-Persian Empire is concerned. Those what would be the 3 ribs represent Lydia, Babylonia, and Egypt. And what we see is the bear is less majestic than the lion. It's more bulkier and weightier. But the reason why Medo-Persia conquered was purely by sheer force and numbers. So it's just purely by numbers and force is how they came into power. Verse 6, after this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now, the third beast here is obviously represents the Hellenistic Empire, just like in Daniel 2. And this one is described as leopard-like. Now, the leopard is also less majestic than the lion, probably not as grand as the bear, but in terms of stealth and swiftness, the leopard is definitely swifter than both those previous beasts. Now, here, of course, with the Greek Empire, we know that Alexander, those of you that are familiar with history and with the study of Alexander the Great, his speed and how he conquered a lot of the region of the Middle East, and also in the parts of Africa and India as well, is by which speed and the stealth that he did it. And so here, the leopard beast is describing this period of this third empire. And so what we see there too is that the 4 wings represent 4 kingdoms rising out of Alexander's empire. So the leopard, but the 4 wings, what does it represent? It represents the 4 kingdoms coming out of that empire, and the 4 heads represent the 4 generals who were under Alexander. So if you know a bit about the history of Alexander, is that after his death, the 4 generals, each of them took control over regions and basically became the rulers of those 4 kingdoms. So the first general is Ptolemy, Ptolemy. It's in your study notes, I guess. But they were given authority over Egypt, Israel, and Arabia, and Petria. Next, we have the second general is Seleucus, and he was governing over Syria, Babylonia, and as far east as India. And number 3, the third general was Cassander, and he governed over Macedonia and Greece. And then the 4th general is Lysimachus, and he governed over Thrace and Bithynia. Thrace being the favorite home of, if you know the movie Spartacus and the Gladiator, Thrace was well known for producing gladiators. But anyway, those are the 4 generals, and out of the so that vision of that beast there describes that period there, where the 4 wings represent 4 kingdoms, and the 4 heads, or the 4 leopard heads, represents the 4 generals. And in verse 7, After this I saw in the night visions, and, behold, a fourth beast, terrible and powerful and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with its feet. It was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little horn, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. The second vision, found in verses 7 to 8, describes the fourth beast, and this one is not like the others. I remember a description was given of the first 3. Here, there's no description given. Just that you're seeing here. So while the others are given animal-like description, there's no description given for this fourth beast. The fourth beast is described as being diverse, which means that it's completely different from all the others. And one of the features is that it totally subdues and breaks in pieces all of the other empires previously, and with a lot more ferocity. Some of the other things we note is that this beast has 10 horns. But while it begins with 10 horns, we see Daniel is giving that he sees an 11th horn rises, and this 11th horn is the little horn. And this little horn uproots 3 of the 10 other horns. And once it's uprooted those other 3, it begins to speak great things. Now, with the uprooting of the 3 horns, 7 of the original remaining, and the little horn is now an 8th, or rather an 11th, is what it's referring here. So first there was 10. Really, there's an 11th horn, right? Then that 11th horn rises up, takes out 3, and then there was only 7. And with him, with the 11th horn, makes him 8, even though he's 8, but he's part of the 7 because he's already taken out the 3. So just remember that, because as we go later on, when I come back to that part, it'll make sense when we're explaining some of the kingdoms. Just like in Daniel 2, the uniqueness of this fourth empire is really emphasized. And so what it basically states here is that this empire will go through several stages. Okay, so this fourth empire will have some stages that it will go through. So conclusion is the fourth beast represents a fourth Gentile empire. So that's what this fourth beast represents. And then in verse 9, I beheld till thrones were placed, and one that was ancient of days did sit, whose raiment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and the wheels thereof burning fire. Verse 10, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands of thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. Now this vision takes place in heaven. So in verses 9 and 10, the vision of the throne of God the Father, that would have been an amazing thing to see, eh? And it's described under the title of the Ancient of Days. So a lot of you old schoolers will be familiar of Ancient of Days. And here he's viewed as a judge. And the book of judgment is now opened. And here we see that he's surrounded by myriads of angels. And these angels are all responsible for carrying out the judgments. And there's literally thousands of them. And in verse 11, and I beheld at that time, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spoke, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed, and it was given to be burned with fire. And as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So here we see the fourth Gentile empire is being judged. So that's what's happening here in verses 11 and 12, is the fourth Gentile empire is being judged. And if you look at verse 11, it's the fourth beast, especially the little horn, that is judged and destroyed. So the empire, but in particular, is the little horn. And later on we'll find out who this little horn is. But that little horn is being judged and destroyed here in verses 11 and 12. As for the other three, in verse 12, two things are stated. Their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and time. So this is referring to the other three empires. So we're talking about the fourth empire here, right? So this is talking about the previous three empires. And on the day of judgment, their dominion was taken away, and their lives were prolonged for a season and time. So the third vision is of God the Father. And the vision here is that God the Father is ready to move out in judgment. He's ready to move out in judgment, specifically against the fourth empire. Verses 13-14 contains the fourth vision. And the fourth vision in verse 13, I saw in the night visions, and behold, there came with the clouds of heaven one like unto a son of man, and he came even to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. In verse 14, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Now here it's describing the setting up of the kingdom of God. And this is following the fourth, this is straight after the destruction of the fourth empire, or the fourth Gentile empire. And what it's explaining here is that this sequence is referring to the second coming in verse 13. So the second coming, then it follows the 1,000 year or the Messianic kingdom in verse 14. Now, what we're seeing here is pretty much essentially the same overview of the four Gentile empires in Daniel 2. Daniel 2 of the image of the image or the statue. And now he gives interpretation of verses 15-27. And so there are some details that are slightly different here, but in verses 15-27 is we're going to see a real emphasis on the fourth empire. Here we see that here we see Daniel's requesting an interpretation, and then he's given a summary interpretation in verses 17-18. So verses 15-16, we see Daniel is requesting an interpretation, and then in verses 17-18, he's given a summary of that interpretation. In verse 17, these great beasts which are four kings that shall arise out of the earth. Verse 18, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Now in verse 17, we see that Daniel was told that these four beasts represent four kingdoms. And what's noted there is that, but the servants of the Most High, who will possess the kingdom, for whatever will be possessed by the four Gentile empires will only be temporary in verse 18. So so whatever these four empires think they have is only temporary in verse 18. Whereas earlier we saw the four beasts that come out of the sea. Here, what we see here is that, before we saw those beasts come out of the sea, here we see they come out of the earth. So earlier the four beasts came out of the sea. Here now we're seeing that they come out of the earth. Coming out of the sea emphasizes, I guess, obviously their Gentile identity. Otherwise, they're not Jewish. And when those beasts are coming out of the earth, it's emphasizing their humanity. So these are human kingdoms, not divine kingdoms. Okay, so when it comes out of the sea, it's identifying their Gentile nationality, but when it's coming out of the earth, it's emphasizing their human origins. Verse 19, then I desired to know the truth concerning the fourth beast, which was diverse from all of them, exceeding terrible, whose teeth were of iron and its nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with its feet. So, again, we've already read that, but having received a summary, what we see in the interpretation there, verses 19 to 22, we see that Daniel's requesting more interpretation regarding the fourth beast. So he's wanting more details regarding that fourth beast. And when he makes this request, Daniel is describing further what he saw in regards to the fourth beast. And he points out that its diverseness, it's pointed out. And because of that diverseness, Daniel is now seeking what does that mean? What does this diverseness means? So what it's saying is, what is the meaning of the 10 horns? In verse 28, and then finally the little horn in verse 22. He causes 3 of the 10 horns to fall. He speaks great things. He wars against the saints and is allowed to prevail over them. But finally he is personally defeated by the coming of the ancient days. Once the judgment is passed on the little horn by the Ancient of Days, who will be done away with the kingdom and will pass over to the saints. Now, verse 23-26, we see Daniel is then given the interpretation of that fourth beast. And then in Daniel 2, remember, just like in Daniel 2, but here with the fourth empire, what we're seeing here is that there's still several stages. There's actually several stages to the fourth kingdom, but here, and so this is Daniel 2 only had 3 of them, remember, but here we're seeing more stages added to the fourth beast. Verse 23, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all the kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. So here in verse 23, we see that the fourth empire is seen in its united stage. So it's only in its united stage, and it's in this first stage that it's different from the previous 3 empires. And that's probably what Daniel's asking some clarification on this, because remember, Daniel 2, he was given that vision from the first one, but here it's the same, but there's a slight difference here, and it's in this united stage that Daniel's seeing. This is then followed by the second stage. So the united stage is the first stage of the fourth empire. Then it's followed by a second stage, and the second stage is the one world government. One world government. That's in verse 23. And in verse 23, it says that the fourth empire will devour the whole earth. That thought, because it will devour the whole earth in verse 23a. Then in verses 24, 25, and 26, and as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom shall 10 kings rise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the former, and he shall put down 3 kings. And he shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and he shall think to change the times and the law. And there shall be given unto his hand until a time and a times and a half a time. But the judgment shall be set, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. Now this is followed by the 10 kingdom stage. So from the one world stage, remember the first stage, united stage. What was the second stage? Is the one world government stage. And this is followed by the next stage, which is the 10 kingdom stage. So after the one world government, there will be a 10 kingdom stage. in verse 24. And then following that stage is followed by the little horn, and this is called the Antichrist stage in verses 24 and 26. If you wanted to know when does the Antichrist stage begin, it happens during or after the 10 division stage is when the Antichrist pops up. So he's the little horn, the Antichrist. Now, while we see that the fourth empire is different from the previous three, what we also see is little horn is also diverse from the other 10. So the little horn is quite different from the other 10. And what he does is that he actually takes out 3 of these kings in verse 24. So whatever the world stage is that point where it's governed by 10 kings, this whole world, and it's talking about the whole world, not the Middle East. The Antichrist rises up out of that, and he takes out 3 of those kings, and then obviously the other 7 then decide to follow the Antichrist. But there is a unique thing that this Antichrist has. He has a unique power, and I don't know if any of you have picked it up, but it's in the verses there. Verse 25 again points out he's speaking great things. So this Antichrist character, or the little horn, in verse 25 is seen here speaking great things, and also he's speaking against God, and he's also speaking against the saints. He also, another thing that he has is that he seeks to change the times and the seasons, and he'd only be allowed to rule for only times and a half a time. Now, from the other passages, you'll see that this obviously means 3.5 years is what that, for a times and a half a time, it's 3.5 years. So we know that the tribulation is, or the peace treaty is for 7 years, and obviously half of that is 3.5 years. But then in verse 26, his domination is destroyed. In verse 27, and the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Little horn is destroyed. Messiah sets up the Messianic kingdom, set up for us in verse 27. The saints here, now just to be clear too, the saints in Daniel refers to the remnant of Israel. This is actually not talking about the church here, it's talking about the remnant of Israel, which is obviously the believers that are Jewish believers. So we can talk more about that later in the other chapters, but just thought I'd note that here it's referring to the remnant of Israel and not to the church. Now here we see the chapter ends with Daniel's conclusion regarding his reaction to what he just sees in verse 28. So what we actually see is that Daniel 2 is given some, obviously, the details in terms of the image and the empires, but then in 7 he's given more detail. So what we find is that the 4th empire has 5 stages. So the 4th empire has 5 stages. And we're just going to quickly go through the summary combination of the 2 chapters of Daniel 2 and 7. And we've got to compare those two. Now, it's probably easier if you can refer to the chart there where I put Daniel 2. So what we see is Daniel 2 and 7 describe the 4 Gentile empires, what we've just gone through. And with it there's a real emphasis on the last empire, which is the 4th one. And we know that the 4th empire goes through several stages. Now, here in that chart there that I've got in front of you, is the comparison side by side. So in Daniel 2, you'll see how it goes 1, 2, and 3. And then if you go Daniel 7, it's the same, 1, 2, but then 3, there's 2 extra details that Daniel 7 has where Daniel 2 doesn't. Can you see that? Whereas in Daniel 7 on 3 on the Hellenistic Empire, there's the United States and the four division stage. Okay, now if you go back to Daniel 2 on that chart, you'll see that on the fourth empire, you'll see that there's three stages under that: the United States, the two division stage, and the 10 division stage. When you look over in Daniel 7, there's the United stage, but then there's the one world government stage, which is different. So under Daniel 7, there's the one world government stage, which is added to the three stages that was revealed in Daniel 2. Now, mostly the two passages really reveal the same thing, but other than that, there's those slight things in Daniel 7 that is picked up in regards to the one world government, and also some of the stages of the Hellenistic Empire is different in Daniel 7. Now, if you combine the two charts together, then you really view it. You would view it as the following things. So, 1, the Babylonian Empire; 2, the Persian Empire; 3, the Hellenistic Empire. Then under this there's two stages: the United Stage and the four division stage. Then we go to the fourth empire. And then under that is the United Stage, two division stage, one world government stage, and you have the Antichrist stage. Okay, so that's 5 stages. So when you combine the two, you will end up with 5 stages under the fourth empire. And we're mainly focusing on the fourth empire, really. That's because that's the stage they're all in. Now let's look at the fourth empire. Now that we move on to the fourth empire, there's this emphasis on it being really diverse, and let's take a closer look at that as well. Now, the name for this empire would be imperialism. And in Daniel 2, verses 40 to 43, and in Daniel 7, verses 7 to 12, you see Daniel describing this empire and the 5 different stages. So there's 5 different stages. Now, it starts with Rome. So when Rome comes in power after the Greeks, that basically starts the fourth empire. The 5 stages. Now, it's some have interpreted Rome as being representing the whole fourth empire. That's actually not correct. They're part of the fourth empire, but they are not. They're not representative of the whole empire. If you get what I mean, they started off as the first stage, and so the way they call it is imperialism. So they begin the imperialism empire, and it's them that start off the first of the 5 stages. What happened with the previous 3 empires is that when Babylon would conquer an area, what they didn't do was they didn't set up rulers or Babylonian rulers in the countries that they conquered, but they basically set up its own nationals within the country to run the country. So when they conquered Judah, Babylon used Zedekiah and Gedaliah to rule over them as well. Now, Persia did the same thing. So when the Persians came to take over a country, they didn't. They just used its own nationals to govern themselves. Okay, so this is where you'll see Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, who was under the Persian rules, but they allowed them to still govern. Their own. They used the nationals to govern the countries. And the Greeks worked the same way as well. Now remember, they allowed the Jewish high priest to rule throughout the period of Greek domination. But Rome was different. They began the system called the imperialism system. And what makes them different is that when Rome conquered, they basically ruled. They had Romans or Roman consulates govern over your country. Okay. Examples of that is Pontius Pilate in the New Testament, Felix, Festus. So they'd always have a Roman ruler over you. Okay, so that's what imperialism is. This was the policy of imperialism. That's why it's different from the other three. So that's why it's better to call this Fourth Empire imperialism rather than Rome, or rather than Roman. So let's quickly look at the 5 stages of imperialism, just to give us some detail on that. So what was the first stage of the Fourth Empire? The first stage is the United stage. Okay, and this is where Rome started off, of course. And it's probably commonly known in history by the Roman Empire. And so this is the first stage of the Fourth Empire, as the Roman Empire started off. It lasted from 63 BC right through to 364 AD. So that's how long the Roman Empire lasted. And that was under the United States. So that's the first stage. And that's the Roman Empire stage. Now, after that, it breaks into the two-division stage. The two-division stage. And this is foreseen by Daniel 2, but Daniel 7 doesn't see it. Began in 364 AD, and emperor by the name of Valentinian divided the Roman Empire into an east and west division. So here we come into the stage where there's an east and west division of the Roman Empire. So before it was one stage, now we see a break of the Roman Empire in east and west. Now from there on, we see the empire of imperialism broken up into a east and west balance of power. Now, when did this begin? For those of you that are familiar with history, the Western Roman Empire, its headquarters was in Rome, Rome in Italy. The other division, headquarters in Constantinople. So the balance of power within the Roman Empire was East and West division. And so in terms of the Eastern division, that power only remained in Constantinople until 1453 AD. It fell under the Turkish invasion. Now, when Constantinople fell, what we see there is the political rulers of that time, they fled northward into Russia. So they flee into Russia, and they infiltrated the government, and they set up a Roman type of government there, still imperialism, but the rulers there, you're probably familiar with it, the Tsars. So the word Tsar is C-Z-A-R-S. So that's Russian for Caesar. Russian for Caesar. So they set up a Roman Empire, and they called themselves the Roman Empire there. That's the official title they gave themselves. After they fell to the Turks, they went north. Now, eventually, of course, the Eastern balance of power pretty much stayed in the Soviet Union. And so that's probably where you see a lot of it. So as the collapse of communism was falling around the European countries, pretty much the power balance pretty much stayed in terms of where Russia is concerned. So that's interesting to note too, but that also will be some notes that we'll take note of. We'll come back to in detail later on in the chapters in terms of where Russia is concerned. So even today, things are shifting in terms of balance and power, and Islam is becoming a major one as well. But the power is shifting in regard to that. Then you see the Western division. And when we go back to that, the power still remained in Rome from 364 to 476. And then Rome fell, of course. And when Rome fell, it shifted to France. And this was by a chap by the name of 800 AD, Charlemagne. And he called his domain the Holy Roman Empire of the Frankish nation. So that's where it went from. When Rome fell, it went to France. Then in 962 AD, a chap by the name of Otto of Germany defeated the Franks. And then they set up a Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. So the word Kaisers, which is German for Caesar. So can you see the influence of the Romans or their Roman Empire? And you'll see that's so you see that imprint quite strong here. So currently we're in the present stage of the two division stage, East and West. But next, we're going to touch on the one world government stage. So from the current state that we're in, we're expected to see that it will go to, from the two division stage, it will go to the one world government stage. Okay, so the next three stages, so we've already covered the first two stages of the Fourth Empire. Remember I said there was 5? The next three stages we're going to talk about now are all future. Okay, so the next three stages and the one world government stage are still future. So at some point, when the East and West balance of power break down, it will lead to a one world government. And this stage is seen by Daniel 7, but not by Daniel 2. Daniel 7:23 clearly states that at some point, the Fourth Empire devours the whole earth. Now, I'm just going to talk about that, this term, the whole earth. It's one of the things why this particular empire is very different from the other three empires, because the other three empires never conquered the whole earth. Here, this Fourth Empire, and remember, when we're looking at it now, it's not just the Middle East anymore. It's now including all of us. Even here in little old New Zealand, it's affected by the coronavirus. All of a sudden, all of us, and doesn't matter how, whether you're in the Pacific, it will all be affected by this. And this is where you can see it's very believable that the whole world will be under this particular empire. Now, the Romans never fully conquered the whole world as well. Now, there are some there's some that have interpreted this that yes, the Romans did. There's this term expression, then known world. So they would say that yes, the Romans conquered the world, but only the then known world. But the problem was that Rome never even conquered all of the then known world as well, because if you look at history, the Romans wasn't like Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great extended way out up into India, other parts of the Africa as well, and the Romans never went that far. Also, the Empire of Rome never conquered the Parthian Empire, and also Scotland is a good mention here. Scotland was also part of the Roman world, and they couldn't conquer Scotland. Remember, they had to build. Well, I don't say remember, but Rome had to build what they call the Hadrian Wall in order to keep the nomads of the north away of northern Scotland away from taking over the parts of Britain that Rome had controlled. So Rome was by far. They didn't conquer all of the territories as what some have interpreted there. But the main point here is that, and the reason why I guess the emphasis is that you can't call this Fourth Empire Rome, because they haven't been in a position to conquer all of the world, and they're not even a current power at the moment to do that. So they're only the first stage. So there will be the next stage. So the one world government stage is what we're talking about here. At some point, there will be a one world government stage following the stage that we're in now, and then after the one government stage, wait, there's more. Is the 10 division stage. So after the one world government, will be a 10 division stage. Now this is seen in both Daniel 2 in the 10 toes, and in Daniel 7 in the 10 horns. 10 division stage is clearly stated to come out of the one world government stage. This where previous people have tried to interpret the European Union as part of this. Probably hear the interpretation of it, but it can't be that. Some have taught that the European Union is the 10 toes when it was trying to do that, but it can't be, because the text is talking about the whole world here, and it's not just talking about a region. Now, the European Union may be one of those 10 kingdoms. Now, if you look at the whole globe, there's the South Pacific, there's the South America, North America, there's the Australasia, Oceania, then you've got all those. So there's enough around. If you break it up, if you have your own time, you go look at it. It's quite valid where a 10 division stage can happen. Okay, so it's not just the European Union that sets all of that. I remember that was the early teaching in the 80s. I remember that they say that as part of the 10 division stage, it would keep your eye on the European Union, but that's not the case. Here the text is talking about the whole earth, and so it has to talk about a 10 division stage that covers all of the whole world regions. Okay, so the next stage is the Antichrist stage. And the Antichrist stage comes out of the 10 kingdom stage, where the Antichrist will rise to power. The Antichrist will rise to power. Eventually, the Antichrist will be, obviously, he's not prominent during the 10 kingdom phase, but during it, he rises to power, and he has enough power to kill 3 or take out 3 of 10 kings. And then once he does, the other 7 simply submits to the Antichrist authority. So I'm only speculating, but I'll say those 3 kingdoms must be quite powerful kingdoms that, of those 3 taken out, would be the other 7 would obviously wouldn't be as significant as the 3 that the Antichrist has taken out. Now, the timing for this stage will be discussed later in chapter 11, but it's in the middle of the tribulation, and we'll talk about more detail with this. But there's the last 2 passages. So we've already covered the first 2 passages talking about the time of Gentiles. The last 2 passages is Revelations 13, verses 1 to 10. And this is the third passage. And I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns 10 diadems, and upon his head names of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his throne, and great authority. Now here we see Daniel 2 surveys the 4 empires, but here in Revelation 13, there's some familiar usage of terms here, just like in Daniel. It's almost the same. But here, Revelation 13, it's focusing specifically on the 4th empire. And the emphasis on Revelation 13 is really at the 5th stage, which is the Antichrist stage. So here the beast that John saw is the same beast that Daniel sees in chapter 7, which is non-descript. But here the beast is... So Daniel saw the same thing that John is seeing here, but John is giving a description of it. Remember previously Daniel couldn't give a description of the 4th beast, of the 4th vision? Here we see John is giving the description of this beast. So he's given description in verse 1. The beast has 10 horns and 7 heads. The 10 horns are found in Daniel 7, and they represent the 10 kingdoms. And this is the 4th stage of the empire of imperialism. And then the 10 division state gives way to the 5th stage, which is the 10 kingdoms, which continues to go right to the end. Now, the difference between the 2 stages is that the 4th stage is divided into 10 kingdoms, ruled co-equally by men, while in the 5th stage, so there's a 10 division stage, but when it comes to the 5th stage, Antichrist rules all of them. Okay, so it means that the other kings are subject to him. Now, there's a new element introduced in Revelation 13. The beast has 7 heads. This wasn't revealed before. So Revelation does that the beast has 7 heads. The meaning of those will be explained in the last passage we'll go through, which is the 4th passage. The beast has a leopard-like body, like feet, and a lion-like mouth. This then is the interpretation explained of verse found in Daniel 7:12. And as for the rest of the beast, it says their dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. What it means is there that in the 4th beast here that we're seeing here, it has what are the features? Bear-like feet, a mouth like lion, and leopard-like body. But it means that the previous 3 empires still has influences on this. That's what it's meaning. So there are still, this fourth empire takes on some of the previous uh, the previous likeness from the previous empires is transferred over here. So therefore, that's why it's prolonged. So their legacy has flowed into the fourth empire. And then in verse 3, the death and resurrection of the Antichrist is viewed. And we see that one of the heads is smitten and unto death, and the death stroke was healed. So here we see that the Antichrist is killed, but then just like Jesus, the Antichrist is resurrected here as well. But we'll just touch on that. Later we'll go into more details. That's in verse 3. Verse 4, then what we see is the worship of the Antichrist is described. So obviously when the Antichrist rises again after being killed, in verse 4, and they worship the dragon because he gave us authority unto the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, and who is able to war with him? Interesting stuff there. So this is a stage where obviously the Antichrist is killed, comes back, and then you'll see people will worship him. Obviously, if you see a guy come back from the dead, and that you see that he has power, this is where the worship of the beast becomes. And this is during the tribulation.